Hello and welcome to today's webinar. Now that ransomware has gone nuclear, how can you avoid becoming the next victim? Today's event is brought to you by KnowBe4 and produced by ActualTech Media. Now, before we get started, we have a little bit of housekeeping that we first need to cover. My name is David Davis of ActualTech Media, and I'm excited to be your moderator. I'll introduce you to today's presenter in just a moment. But first, I want you to know that we have a number of handouts available for download there in your audience console. Go ahead and download those now where it says handouts in the GoToWebinar control panel because you won't have access to those handouts after the event. We also want this to be an educational webinar, so I encourage you to use the questions box in the GoToWebinar control panel to ask as many questions as you'd like about ransomware. We'll be doing a dedicated Q&A session at the end of the event. And finally, we'll be announcing the prize winner of an Amazon $300 gift card on today's live event. If you're watching this event on demand, I'm sorry the drawing has already occurred. Full prize terms and conditions can be found at events.actualtechmedia.com. And without further delay, I'm excited to introduce you to today's expert presenter. That is Mr. Roger Grimes, data-driven defense evangelist at KnowBe4. Roger has a mind-blowing presentation lined up for you today. Take it away, Roger.
Oh, well, thank you so much, David, and thanks to everyone that's shown up today to hear my, now that ransomware has gone nuclear, how you can avoid becoming the next victim, or I kind of like to call it Ransomware 2.0. If you haven't met me before, I'm Roger Grimes. I'm the data-driven defense evangelist for KnowBe4. Like David said, I talk a lot. I go pretty quickly, but I've been doing computer security for 32 years. I'm working on my 12th book on the computer security book and done over 1,000 magazine articles. I was the InfoWorld and CSO Weekly security columnist from 2005 to 2019. There's some of my books. The latest one is Cryptography Apocalypse, which talks about how quantum computers getting ready to break all modern day traditional crypto in one way or another and what you can do to prepare. But I work for KnowBe4, and I love working for KnowBe4. They're the world's largest security awareness training vendor. And truly, out of all my jobs, out of 32 years in this, and I've worked for Microsoft and Foundstone and McAfee and stuff like that, KnowBe4 has easily been my favorite company and favorite job. I love working there. But today we're just talking about ransomware, traditional ransomware, how it got more malicious, how it became nuclear, how it became Ransomware 2.0, and what you can do to defend yourself. So I appreciate everybody being around for the ride, and we're going to start out just talking about traditional ransomware and the history of it. I remember when the first ransomware program came out. It was called the AIDS Cop Trojan, and I was back doing malware analysis back in 1986, 87. This came out a couple of years after that. But it was kind of interesting because not only was it the first ransomware program, but it was actually created and spread by a William and Mary professor of archaeology or something like that, some famous dude. He kind of ruined a bit of his career by doing it. And William and Mary was only like 40 miles away from my home, so this is very topical and close. But what he did was he got a list. I forget where he got the it was a medical mailing list, full of doctors and clinics and nursing things. And he sent them this disc saying, hey, we'll teach you about AIDS and teach your staff about AIDS. It's, security training. And back then AIDS was kind of unknown. It was killing people. It wasn't like today where you can take a vaccine and take a bunch of medicines. It was really, really bad and killing a lot of people, and a lot of people were afraid. And he said, hey, here's education on it. And it had an end user license agreement that if people read said that I reserve the right to lock up your data and your computer systems if you don't pay. And it had a counter in it that if they used it 10 times or 100 times or something like that, it would automatically lock up the person's computer or lock up the data. All it really did was obfuscated. It actually renamed all the directories to like higher order ASCII characters, so it looked like gobbledygook, and then copied them into one subdirectory and all the documents in there. So it really looked like it was encrypted, but it was just obfuscated. And actually, John McAfee of McAfee Antivirus fame, that one of the first things he did to get famous is he wrote a program that would, put it back, because it was as simple as like renaming, going to each ASCII character and like, subtracting 32 or something like that. But the guy eventually got caught, and he was even telling people to send money to a Panama bank account, and eventually he got charged because his defense was, hey, I told everybody in the end user license agreement that I was going to do this, and they were using it for free. But he also, the program if it encrypted a computer you were using, or obfuscated a computer you were using, and it would after a while, it would actually put up a sign saying, hey, if you need this computer, you can take and run this program, and I'll take it off this computer, and you put it on the other computer, and we put it on the other computer, I'll unlock this computer. But it didn't work, or never was intended to work. I'm not sure which, but it would then just lock up multiple computers. And because of that, he was actually found guilty. And I don't know whether he ever got, I know he got arrested. I know that he, was being tried, but I don't know whatever happened with the case. I have to look that up one day, especially if I'm doing this talk more. But really, there were a couple little ransomware programs after that, but they were very hit or miss. But the first contemporary one was 2005, which was a big deal because it showed up using asymmetric encryption and using RSA and Diffie-Hellman keys. Before that, in between 1989 and 2005, they were using symmetric keys, or actually, it was far more common. They were just using crappy encryption. They would make their own encryption algorithms, which were horrible, and they could be disassembled or, debugged or, decrypted really, really easy. But finally, in 2005, some professionals said, hey, why are we making up our own encryption? Let's just use Diffie-Hellman and RSA and that sort of stuff. By 2013, you finally had CryptLocker ransomware program asking for payment in Bitcoins that allowed them to get paid without being caught. So that really just, that just took off like that. By 2016, you really kind of had the height of ransomware, at least sheer numbers, not sheer damage. But they started even doing things like RDP, Remote Desktop Protocol, Microsoft's remote control program, brute password guessing. So they were starting to add some tricks instead of it just being social engineering. They were starting to look for weak passwords or unpatched software. By 2017, Petya, made by Russia, attacked Ukraine and took a lot of Ukraine's infrastructure out. And also in 2017, another ransomware program called not Petya, which is I still think it's just a funny name, attacked Maersk, which is the world's largest shipping company, and caused $300 million in damages. And still to this day, in America, the U.S. Coast Guard requires that all big ships, coming into port, they have to certify that they don't have any cybersecurity incidents going on. That's like the first. It was like that was just put in place. I guess 2017 to 2018 was the first time that a computer issue was actually being considered by the Coast Guard about whether your vessel was seaworthy or not. So that was kind of notable. And then in 2017, WannaCry, it used to ask you for just $300, everybody, $300, and you had to pay it in 7 days, or your files would be deleted. But probably the biggest thing that we saw that was kind of concerning was not the money, but that it had 20 localized languages. So, you have localized languages, meaning that when it goes off, it detects the language. If it's on an English system, it displays English. If it's on Russian, it displays Russian. If it's on Ukrainian, it puts Ukrainian, that sort of stuff. And, China, it does Mandarin or whatever. Or actually simplified Chinese if it's written. But that, that was kind of concerning because you're like, okay, they're, wanting it to go global and they're being very professional about it. And today it's very professional. Early on in the history of ransomware, it was very consumer focused. It would go off. It would immediately encrypt stuff. It asked for $300, very much focused on end users at home. Hey, we've encrypted your computer, and if you want it back, pay us the $300. Now it started to move into like business focus. They realized that the consumers at $300 a pop, and many times the consumers weren't paying, that they just weren't paying, that they could get a lot bigger bang for the buck by attacking corporations. And they actually looked into, when they encrypted a corporate data, they looked to find out how much in annual revenues that the company made, and they would, do a calculation going, okay, we're going to charge you 2% of annual revenues. They actually went up and down. They went to like 10%, half of annual revenues, and they found out people weren't paying. And so they actually found the sweet spot that people were willing to pay naturally to be somewhere around 2% of annual revenues, that people would say, okay, I can pay that, but it's not going to bankrupt me, so that it made them more likely to pay. And today they kind of start with a big offer, maybe more than 2% of revenues, but they'll settle for something even less than 2% of revenues, and they actually have people to negotiate the prices. It's quite weird. Here's some popular ransomware names today. There's a bunch of different families. So when we say WannaCry or something like that, or Global Imposter or Gan Crab or something like that, sometimes we're talking about the ransomware program, and sometimes we're talking about the ransomware gang, the person behind it. It depends on the context that we're talking about, that, which one we're talking about. but sometimes we talk about them as one and the same. We're talking about the ransomware program or the ransomware gang behind the program. And again, its destructive capabilities matured over the years. Early on, when you ran ransomware, it just went off immediately, encrypting whatever computer it was on. It didn't care what it was, and it asked you for $300. Then it started to spread like a worm. When it started going into the corporate environments, it's like, hey, I need to spread first. And initially, they would say, let me spread it to every machine. They'd actually do password dumps on the local machine, try to get admin passwords, and then spread around the network. And they would spread like a worm. And they'd say, okay, we're going to spread like a worm for a week or two or a month, and then we'll go off, then we'll encrypt, and then encrypt everything they touch. So it'd be a combination of workstations and servers and things like that, but really no kind of, really intellectual thought put into it. Now today, when the ransomware breaks in, it kind of does it with what's called a stub file or a downloader, in that it breaks in, it dials home on some what we call command and control center channel and servers, and it's using dynamic DNS and moving around the internet, and it notifies the hacker that it's in. So the hacker literally goes to this admin console that lists all of the compromises, the dozens to hundreds to thousands of new compromises. He finds out what the different locations that have been compromised. And if you see something juicy, like he sees a Fortune 500 or a doctor's office or police or something like that, he's like, oh, I'm in, this is juicy. And they'll figure out the best strategy, and they'll actually never get to some of the small people, right? Like they're too busy trying, they're trying to maximize their money and revenue. So if you're a small fish, sometimes they will either just immediately go off and encrypt your data because they just, like, hey, I don't want to spend too much effort for this, or you just don't get attacked at all, or they wait to break into you at a later date or something like that. They're really going after the biggest bang for the buck most of the time early enough. Now they kind of figure out, they get inside, and the hacker uses tools that they bring along that are separate away from the program to figure out what to encrypt. They're looking for data. They're listening in on the C-levels emails to find out what are the big projects are going on. They're looking at financial statements to determine how much they can charge them. They're trying to determine what they can encrypt to make the victim go uncle fastest, right? And to determine the ability of the victim to pay how much. They have for a long time been disabling and corrupting online backups of all types. So if people thought they were going to do a restore and it was online, they encrypted it or they corrupted it so it wasn't really working. Now they're actually even disabling offline backups, because people don't understand that a lot of people go, oh, it's an offline backup. And I'm like, well, can you get to it or request it remotely? And people are like, yep. I was like, that's an online backup, not an offline backup. But what they're doing is doing things like they'll encrypt your online backup with a separate key. Like every backup, tape backup or otherwise, has some type of encryption key, right? It's required by all the regulations. And they will change. The admins and the tape people and the data backup people don't know they've done it, but they'll actually change the encryption key. And so you think you're backing up every night or daily or for months or something like that. And those online backups get moved into offline backups, but they're actually encrypted with keys you don't know about. And then they change the key back to the original key. When the person goes to try to do the data restore during the ransomware incident, it doesn't work. So, I mean, they're getting really, this is what they're doing today, and it's getting worse. So they're just simply in the victim's environment a whole lot longer, doing a lot more analysis and research. It's a lot more professional. There's ransomware as a service where, they can pay a certain amount, even if you're not somebody who can code ransomware, if you don't mind taking the risk, the criminal risk, you can buy ransomware as a service. It will go out and infect things, and you can deal with them and collect the money, and you pay a certain amount of percentage, and there's even 24/7 tech support for both the victim and the person using the ransomware to extract money. They're using built-in trusted tools that are already in the operating system, like PowerShell, to do the maliciousness, because it's harder for anti-malware to detect something when it's part of the operating system. Again, maliciously encrypting data backups with keys you don't know, so you think you have these great backups, but you really don't. And the response over the years has changed. Early on, the victims didn't usually pay, so ransomware didn't really take off, but then they started attacking businesses and corrupting the backups, and then cybersecurity insurance arrived on the scene, and the victims started to pay more often for many years, for the last, 4 or 5 years before before the end of last year. Most people, only about 40% of people are paying. I mean, that figure changes, person to person, year to year. But if I talk to people that did a lot of ransomware recoveries, they would tell me about 40% of the people were paying. So that's about more than it was in the past. Today, they almost always pay. Even the victims, you have victims that will say, oh, we don't pay, or the policy is we don't pay. But so much damage is going on that it is almost always cheaper for the person to pay the ransom, and the companies that didn't pay the ransom kind of wish they did. So you had like the city, I think it's the city of Atlanta or Baltimore, one of the two, that didn't pay. And weeks to months of recovery. No matter what the situation is, paying the ransom is almost always faster and cheaper than not paying the ransom. Some companies that have policies that say they're not going to pay the ransom, they'll actually, and they don't know it, but they'll hire a company that helps with the ransomware recovery, and that company is actually paying the ransom and getting the keys. There's even some ransomware companies that said, hey, we promise not to pay the ransom, or we work without paying the ransom. One of the security researchers did a test and found out all of them are paying the ransom that said that they were not. He actually posed as a ransomware person, and he posed as a customer that was infected by ransomware, and found out that every one of those companies were reaching out and paying the ransom. I can't say they all were, but I think it was the 4 or 5 that he tested, they all were paying the ransom, even though they were telling their customers they weren't paying the ransom. And maybe that's good, because if you get a policy that says you don't pay the ransom, it can help you out. Typical scenario today is that if someone has cyber insurance, or somewhere around a third to half the people have cyber insurance today, the victim that gets hit by ransomware will call the insurance company. The insurance company doesn't have people on staff that does, computer ransomware recovery. They call an incident response broker that handles all their ransomware responses. So they call some guy or his company that is the point person that takes charge of it. He's kind of like the general contractor, and that guy calls in all the specialists. He's even calling in a ransomware payment negotiator that's for the particular family. He will call in media specialist. He will call in network recovery specialist, tape backup, specialist. He will help you stop the damage and try to do the recovery. And again, they have professional full-time negotiators. There's people in this world that do nothing but negotiate with the ransomware people. Like, oh, you've got GanCrab. This is the guy that handles that negotiation. It's like this. It is almost so professional and full time that it is almost like a movement of capital from the victim to the insurance companies to the brokers to the specialists to the ransomware creators. Right? It's just this normal cycle today, and there's media response teams and so on and so on. That's the current state of malware, ransomware, and it just got more malicious in the last couple of months. So essentially, the ransomware crooks got tired of victims saying no because the victims possibly had a tape backup or a tape restore, and most of the victims didn't. That's why they were already paying, but there are ones that sometimes said, nope, I'm not going to pay you. We've got a policy against it, or they had a good backup, and so the ransomware said, what can we do? And they realized that the unauthorized access they had was the hacker goal. Like, it wasn't locking up the data was a means to the end. But the access they had, they could do anything. They realized that was the value, and what else could they do? Well, encrypting the data and holding it for hostage was the least of what they could do. Now what they do is here. This is ransomware 2.0. This is ransomware going nuclear. They steal intellectual property and data, they steal credentials, they threaten the victim's employees and customers, and they do public shaming. None of this stuff will a good tape backup save you. So to start with the data leak stuff, ransomware now frequently copies your data. So they spend time finding out the company's crown jewels and databases, and they love targeting database servers. They'll stop the database services. They'll copy gigabytes of data, and then they'll tell the person, hey, we're going to not only encrypt your data, we've not only encrypted it, but if you don't pay, we're going to give all that data to either your competitors or to the internet. And you have to think, every company I know has things you don't want the outside world to know, either intellectual property secrets or emails. Like, I don't know a company that doesn't have internal email conversations where they're not dogging the customer sometimes, right? You just have some customer that, the tech support's like, can you believe this guy Rogers, telling us that we need to do this? He's an idiot. And they don't mean to be mean, but it's just the way people talk inside of companies when they're trying to solve problems. do you want that stuff out there? One of the first times I ever saw data put out there like this was the Sony Pictures attack. I forget when that was, 2014 or something. But remember when the North Koreans or the proxies working on their behalf, they didn't want Sony Pictures to publish that really bad film that nobody would have watched had North Korea not attacked them. But they said, we don't want you to publish this embarrassing, movie picture that embarrasses our North Korean leader. But if you do, we're going to publish we've got your data and we're going to publish it. Sony didn't listen to them, published the picture, and then the North Korean hackers or proxies at the time, I think they were Chinese proxies, actually released the data, and it was all kinds of embarrassing emails. It included emails where the top executives were talking bad about Angelina Jolie, and who was the other comedian? I can see him now, but anyways, they were talking really bad about them, and that potentially is threatening tens of millions of dollars, hundreds of millions of dollars in revenue. So the first group that started to kind of say, hey, we're going to take your data and if you don't pay us, we're going to give it out to the world, that was Maze, the Maze ransomware group. At first, they didn't give out the data. I mean, even though they threatened it, they didn't do it. Then they did it. And this is happening about July, October, somewhere between July and October. Maze started to threaten it. And then they actually followed through with the threat, released people's data publicly, even put it on websites. So, and told press. They called me. I was at InfoWorld Right, and they would call me to announce what they've done and ask me, essentially they had PR teams that were trying to get me, a reporter, involved in reporting upon it. The other ransomware gangs like Zeppelin and Revil and Snatch and et cetera saw how successful Maze was doing. And by December of last year, they were all doing it. And now it's the new normal. So let me say that again. Them stealing the data and then threatening to release the data publicly or to your competitors is now the new norm. And then you can see here's some of the news stories that started, like in November of last year, Allied Universal breached by Maze ransomware, stolen data leaked. Another one, Maze ransomware operators released 2 gig of files were allegedly stolen from the vicinity of Pensacola during a recent attack. And NIMT, ransomware makers may be the latest to adopt a data leak strategy. You see that was in January, and now they all do it. They're all doing it. And here, in January 2011 or January 11th, 2020, this other ransomware published stolen data for the first time. Now it's the new normal. And Travelex, they recently had that. Travelex got, they're people that do, they help you change currencies between different currencies, different countries. The hackers broke in using a missing VPN patch on some servers. The patches were available, but Travelex just hadn't applied it. They broke in, they asked for a $3 million ransom. When that was refused, they revealed that they had their customer data, including credit card information, date of birth, and social security numbers, and they asked for $6 million. So they actually went up in their ransom request. They were in for 6 months. They copied 55 gig of data, sensitive customer data. The hackers gave them 7 days to respond, and then Travelex was down at least 18 days. A lot of pain for not paying the ransom. Let's see, in ransomware hackers, now they're searching for every credential they can steal and reuse to maximize pressure, future pain, and future financial gain. NotPetya stole Windows Active Directory credentials, so they would break into a computer, they would run a Mimikatz hacking tool or Mimikatz itself, and find out the local admin passwords and passwords stored on services, and then use that to break in to spread horizontally throughout the organization. So they stole passwords, but it was only the Windows and Active Directory passwords so they could spread to more machines. Now they're actually extracting every credential they can find in everybody's browser and cache, and then telling those people they have that information. So a good example of that, Brian Krebs, love Krebs on KrebsOnSecurity.com, but he reported on January 6th, that there was this company that got broken into. The ransomware hackers were in the company for 14 months without detection. They went off, and Brian wrote about it. Anytime Brian Krebs is calling you, usually it's not a good sign for your company, but Brian wrote about the ransomware hackers, and this is the company. Many companies often feel like they've been that Brian didn't write about them correctly. And the people that got a hack in that particular hack said, hey, we actually did a good job. We responded very quickly. We cut off most of the damage. We think you should actually write about what a good job we did. And Brian, I think, was even considering that when all of a sudden he found that the hackers were selling all the company's information, including all their employee and customer passwords and logons, for all sorts of stuff. It actually turns out the ransomware people had actually run the TrickBot Trojan to collect a bunch of passwords. And it was, look at this, you want to look at the list of things that they stole here. It was not only their Office 365, but it was even passwords to their password management platforms, direct deposit accounts, Medicaid billing portals, cloud-based health insurance, online payment processing, payroll, prescription services, shipping postage accounts, online accounts, Amazon, Facebook, LinkedIn, Microsoft, Twitter accounts. They're stealing all these passwords from the employees. They're not just getting the network passwords and the Windows passwords. They're collecting every login name and password they can find from everybody. And then they're telling that company, if you don't pay us, we're going to release the information about your employees and customers. Oftentimes we all reuse, I don't, but a lot of us reuse passwords across multiple websites. They're like, we're going to release this information and make your employees' lives a living hell. And they're going to know the only reason we did it is because you did not pay. So they're also, so they're now targeting the employees of the victim, and they're like, Roger, they're literally creating screens that go, Roger Grimes doesn't want to pay us, and we've got all your information, we got your bank accounts, we got your social security numbers, we got your date of birth information. We're getting ready to release that on the internet and let every hacker have it and attack you, and we're only doing it because Roger Grimes didn't want to pay 2% of annual revenues. Can you imagine how that makes those employees feel? If that company says, I'm sorry, we just don't pay the ransom, and then their life becomes hara-kiri, it's got to create issues. And they threaten the customers like, oh, we've got your customer login accounts. Most of the customers are probably reusing these passwords and other websites, and they're letting the customer know that, hey, we've got your login, and we're going to attack you and your company and all as much as we can because Roger Grimes did not want to pay 2% of revenues. And sometimes they actually extort the actual customer in addition to the company. There's an example at the end of last year with a plastic surgery place got broken into, and they didn't pay the ransom, and they actually attacked the patient. So you can read this here. About 15 to 20 patients reported to the clinic that they had received additional extortion attempts from their hackers threatening to publicly release their photos and personal information unless they paid ransom. So can you imagine? They're like, hey, we've got your before and after plastic surgery photos, and we're going to let all your friends know all the plastic surgery you had done. We're going to show them the before pictures. I don't know anybody that wants their before pictures out there on the internet. Pretty wild. And again, they're now even targeting like the managed security service providers. There's that big school system in Texas where they actually broke into the 20 different schools because they all share the same managed security service provider. It used to be that they would just break in through that account. They'd say, okay, every managed security service provider, and usually they're smaller companies, smaller entities that can't afford their own IT security, will have one of these MSPs or MSSPs. They usually have, good credentials into the company, elevated credentials. There are, logins, admin logins, domain admins, that sort of stuff. And so in the past, they would use the MSSP's access to compromise the customers all at once or hit the customers individually. But now they're also going to the MSSP. They did this to a Clearwater one a couple of months ago and told them, pay up or we're going to compromise your customers, and let them know the only reason we compromised them is because you would not pay up. Again, just wild, right, with these threats. Good luck with the tape backup saving you. And they're publicly shaming the people. When they break in, they actually let the public know. They will publicly they will tell the public what they did, what information they have stolen, when they're going to reveal it, how much, that they've asked you to pay the money and you're not paying. They'll call the press. They'll tell you that they'll even call the data, if you're in the UK or under GDPR, they're like, we're going to call your data protection officer and let them know that we compromised you. They create blogs with it. They create websites with it where people can see who they exploited, what type of information they stole, how much information they have. They'll contact media sites to spread the news. Early on when this first happened, I remember meeting with my editor at InfoWorld, Eric Noren saying, hey, I guess we have to have a policy where we don't report on this, right? Because we don't want to encourage and be part of the problem. Well, it's almost like the ransomware gangs and guys don't care because they're making their own public blog sites, and people are checking up, like people every day checking the blog site to see who they've compromised next. Pretty wild stuff there. Maze was the first one. Again, they're the first ones that were actually stealing the information and actually reposting it. So they are the first I knew that tried to call like the media and let them know what's going on. They didn't call us, they emailed us. And they were the first ones I know that kind of had the blog thing where, hey, they just had this dedicated blog that listed all the things that they broke into and how much data they had stolen and who paid and who didn't pay. And they put PR pieces up. It was pretty wild here. And this is a real world example that I saw from a real world victim. I was actually talking to a friend in a bar one weekend, and I was telling him, he's like, oh, you fight ransomware. Well, a company I know called Denison Yachts, he was a big yacht broker, said, they got taken over. And what happened is the hackers broke in, ransomwared the data, stole the credentials, and then they modified DenisonYachtSales.com's main website where all of his customers go. And let me read it to you, just in case you can't see it. Because Robert Denison failed to take very simple security measures on his devices, I hacked into all of his employees' Google accounts that were hosted under the domain name DenisonYachtSales.com. All company leads, accounting archives, employee social security numbers, employee signatures, including data that was sent from the clients of Denison Yachting to the mail accounts of the company are under my control. Is under my control. He needs grammar. So if you have ever conducted business with Bob Denison, your private data might be in my hands right now. What do I ask for? I want Bob to send me 15 Bitcoins. What will happen if my demand is not fulfilled when the countdown here finishes? And it had a countdown. When I saw it, it had like 3 days left. I think he either got 3 days or 7 days. But so when this countdown here finishes, all the data that I previously mentioned will be publicly available for anyone who visits this web page. Bob, this was your fault. Don't make other people pay for your fault. For any questions, you can reach me at DenisonExtortion@protonmail.com. That's a anonymous email service. And if this website shuts down, you can track me on DenisonExtortion.com. So he had modified the main web page of Denison Yachts, which was DenisonYachtSales.com, to have this. Then he actually took out a new domain called DenisonExtortion.com and told people on the first page, if that gets moved, you can go to the new web page, DenisonExtortion.com, to see what happened. And I think when I finally went to Denison, Robert Denison had not paid that I know of. And, I don't know what happened to that data, but this is the new normal. Right? I mean, this is not what they do sometimes. This is what they're doing all the time, and it's just going to get worse. And the reason why is they can do anything, right? And it used to be that they sometimes did it or they did it manually. Now they're automating as much as they can. It steals the data and steals the passwords and all this stuff, and it puts up and changes the website and creates the new, they're just automating the whole thing, making it as automated as possible. So it's just the new norm. Pretty wild. So what can you do? First thing is to realize that the real problem was never ransomware. Ransomware was a symptom of the real problem. It's how ransomware got in. How is the ransomware getting admin? That was the real problem because, yeah, they were breaking in and getting admin, and they were doing ransomware, and they're stealing your data, but they can do anything. And what I mean by that is, suppose we could come up with some remarkable defense that could literally just stop all ransomware, right? Like ransomware we shut it down, it no longer works, it can't encrypt your data. If they're getting in with domain admin root level access, they can still delete your data, copy your data, put in back doors, modify your operating systems, put in keyloggers, put in viruses and Trojans and time bombs and stuff like that. I mean, the problem isn't ransomware. Ransomware is a symptom of your real problem. And if you don't stop hackers and malware from breaking in and getting admin in the first place, you're never going to stop all the bad stuff that they do, because they're always going to be able to do very bad things, and it'll just change what they do. They can steal passwords, they can, get data, they can embarrass you. It's the problem is not ransomware, it's how the ransomware got in. Well, here, if you're asking me what's my 3 top defenses for my money, it's to focus more on security awareness training. better patching, and credential hygiene. And let me explain why. And I collected all the data from the Privacy Rights Clearinghouse database. Anybody can go there. They track over 11.6 billion compromised records. I looked at all the reasons why those records were maliciously compromised, and 70 to 90% of them in any given year is because of social engineering. Let me say that again. 70 to 90% of all malicious data breaches were because of social engineering of some type, usually phishing or through websites. And if you don't stop that, nothing else really matters. It's the number one cause by far. Breaking in using unpatched software just generally across the board is 20 to 40% of all attacks, although it's a smaller part in the ransomware world, although they've been attacking unpatched RDP instances, so make sure you patch your remote desktop protocol. But no matter how good your defenses are against social engineering and phishing, I mean all your technical defenses, your firewalls, your content filtering, and all that sort of stuff, eventually something's going to make it past your technical defenses to the end user, and the end user is going to have to make a decision. First of all, recognize that they're looking at something that's potentially malicious, figure out how to handle it, and whether or not they're going to report it. Well, if social engineering and phishing is responsible for 70 to 90% of all malicious data breaches. And let's say that you disagree with that figure, right? Because I work for a company trying to sell you anti-social engineering training, security awareness training. Just ask yourself in your life, when your company got compromised, how was it done? And I guarantee you, 9 out of 10 times it was social engineering and or unpatched software. I mean, sure, it can be things like an insider threat. It can be misconfiguration or both. That was what happened to Chase Bank a bunch of months ago, where that girl that got fired realized that she still had access after she got cut, and there was a misconfigured firewall she took advantage of and stole data that way. I mean, there's SQL injection attacks, and there's insider threats. I mean, there are other ways people get compromised, but 70 to 90% of it, social engineering and phishing, 20 to 40% of it because of patching, and also just in the ransomware, they do a lot of password guessing against RDP, and apparently people still have really crappy passwords because they only guess like 100 passwords, but passwords are like password and QWERTY and password 123. So these would be my 3 top preventative controls, with by far concentrating on the social engineering aspect of it. And then again, even if you don't like my statistics of 70 to 90%, and I can send you my data, but one of my coworkers, Javed Malik, actually did a study that I can also send you, where he looked at 100 other people's studies, computer security studies that looked at root causes. All of them, they had different figures for what social engineering and phishing was involved in the compromise, but all of them, it was always the number one causative root cause reason by far, followed by patching in most cases. The third cause could be different. Sometimes it was insider threat. Sometimes it was, sometimes even denial of service attacks. Sometimes it was misconfigured websites or something like that, or misconfigured permissions. But social engineering, unpatched software, and patching your software are easily the 2 best things you can do to fight ransomware and other attacks. Essentially, because a tape backup is not going to save you. A data backup is not going to save you from ransomware 2.0 anymore. So you have to do everything, every regular defense in depth computer strategy that you normally do, you got to do. You got to do it all. And that's because the problem isn't ransomware, it's that they have admin access. You still have to have, real tested backups of your critical systems. And let me say 99.9%, I'm just making that figure up. I don't know what it is, but I guarantee it's very close to that. Don't really have tested backups. They think they have backups, and then they get hit by ransomware and find that, turns out my backup's not as, easy or thorough as I thought it was going to be. So you still need a good backup. That is if you have to destroy and recreate everything, you're going to need the data. So you need to have total tested restoration of your backup systems for sure. Then make sure that you have really good credential protection and hygiene and monitoring on those elevated credentials. What I mean by that is you want to make sure that you have the least amount of members of your elevated groups. You know, in Windows, that'd be your administrators group, your domain administrators, your schema administrators, and things like that. You start out with having the least amount of permanent members possible, and then making sure you highly protect and monitor when people are using those credentials. They certainly shouldn't be locked in all the time as admin or domain admin. Maybe you have some checkout program where they have to check out the credentials and they automatically time expire. I love those sort of systems. But you want to make sure that you've got your elevated credentials down to the smallest amount possible, and that you make sure they use long passwords, hopefully maybe two-factor authentication, and that their use is monitored. So if someone's using them in a ransomware attack or to do some horizontal or vertical move, you'll detect it. You want to change, if you get compromised by ransomware, don't just change your network passwords, change every possible password that was changed while it was under control of the ransomware. That means telling your employees, hey, if you checked your bank balance while you're here at work, you need to go change your bank password. You need to change your Facebook account password. You need to change your Twitter password, and that sort of stuff. One really good defense, if you can do it, is to try to make it so that your data is encrypted, so that if they try to steal it, it's actually still encrypted and they can't steal it in an unencrypted state. Microsoft has something called Active Directory Rights Management Service that applies to like document files. By default, it only applies to Microsoft Office documents, but you can buy add-ins that make it apply to PDFs and other databases. But there's other solutions out there that actually containerize your data, containerize either the database or the data in the database, so that if someone tries to take it off site, and it may even work and look like it's working, but as soon as the administrator cuts the account, all of a sudden that data is just encrypted and they can't see it anymore. That certainly is a big protection, so that way they can't steal the data and put it out there on the internet if it's encrypted by default and encrypted in a way that they can't get to it. Very difficult to do, but that is certainly one of your best. Any type of data leak prevention and detection is a good thing to use here. I'm a big believer in cyber security insurance. It's right now relatively low cost. The average cybersecurity payout was until a year or so ago about $10,000, a couple $1,000, and it was $10,000. Then $100,000, and I believe now the statistics as of this year now is that the average cybersecurity insurance payout is $250,000 that's just to the ransom. That doesn't even include the restoration services and all the recovery things. So I suspect cybersecurity insurance is going to start getting a lot more expensive. For a long time, the insurance companies kind of loved cybersecurity insurance because they only had to pay out 40 to 60% of every dollar they took in. So for every dollar somebody paid for cybersecurity insurance, they only had to pay out 40 to 60%, which means they made 40 to 60% profit. I haven't seen the new stats, but I guarantee you that's going to go way down. They're getting a big hit this year because of ransomware going nuclear, and people are probably going to pay more and have to pay more when they're hit by ransomware. You have to make sure that you have a good media incident response team, because how do you handle when the ransomware guys have stolen not only the employee information, but the customer information? In the old days, you might have to send out an email going, hey, just want to let you know we were taken down because of ransomware. Everything's fine. We're recovering. Now you've got to send them a letter that says they've got your login name and password and all your data and information that you shared with us. I mean, that is a different type of letter that you have to write. So get a media incident response team in place ahead of time. You don't want to be making these decisions and hiring things on the fly. It's nice to have them ahead of time. Make sure that you can try to detect any intrusion that you might have, that you have network detection systems, host intrusion detection systems, endpoint detection, anti-malware. I'm a big fan of CrowdStrike and CrowdStrike-like monitoring tools that will actually detect people trying to connect back to kind of malicious, IP addresses and things like that. It's nice if you have the ability to detect massive number of suddenly changing files, i.e. being encrypted. Anything you can do for data leak prevention tools to see that data is headed out of your company. Like, hey, I see 5 gig of data going to Russia, and we don't have any customers in Russia. Well, maybe you should pay attention. Network traffic analysis, again, that's looking for unusual traffic flows. Most computers don't talk to every other computer. Most servers don't talk to every computer. Most servers don't talk to every other server. And most computers don't talk to every server. Use a network traffic analysis tool, and there's a lot of them out there that can start looking at what is the legitimate traffic, right? Because you do have servers that do talk to every computer, your patching servers, your antivirus definition, update servers, and those sort of things. DNS and your WINS, boy, I'm dating myself. DNS or DHCP servers can talk to everybody, but most servers and clients don't talk to every other server and client, and so you want to analyze what's normal, and there's a lot of systems out there that do that, that are built to do this, to analyze your stuff and then tell you what seems to be good and what seems to be bad. There's open source solutions, paid solutions. The paid solutions have a lot more built-in intelligence. And I'm a big fan of those, is looking for network traffic anomalies. I'm also a big believer in honeypots, and not just because I wrote a book called Honeypots for Windows years ago. I think it's out of print now. But that is where you take some system where you're getting ready to take it off the network because it's old and it's hard to support, or it's slow and nobody wants it, and you're thinking about disconnecting and throwing it away. Well, what you should do is leave it on your network, give it a name that sounds like one of your database servers or web servers that somebody might be interested in if they're an attacker. Give it a really juicy name, like confidential business plans or space shuttle or something like that. And then make sure it's fully patched. And then monitor, anytime you plug in a computer, there's all this normal traffic trying to get to that computer to log on to it. There's all kinds of just normal Windows broadcasting traffic. There's your antivirus software is going to be trying to log in to update the signatures. Your patch management server is going to be trying to log in to update. There's all kinds of normal stuff that's connecting to every computer in your network. But kind of filter those out on this honeypot. Just figure out what's normal going to it, what's the normal traffic. And then if anybody tries to scan it or ping it or log into it, well, then you've got your early warning. I'm a big believer of honeypots. Take a system you're about to throw away and turn it into a honeypot. And its only thing is that if somebody touches it and didn't, and doesn't have an authorized reason or a legitimate reason, well, then you've got early warning of something going on that you can respond to. There's some good hackers out there, but I've yet to meet the hacker that didn't have to log into a system or touch it or ping it or try to log into it to be a good hacker. And if they don't know the difference between what's a honeypot and what's not, well, you're at the advantage then. You definitely need to communicate to senior management and tell them about how ransomware has changed. I bet most senior managers and management and board of directors think that ransomware is this thing that could take your data and encrypt it. Share with them what the new ransomware 2.0, what the new normal is, and talk to them. Like if they say, we're not paying the ransom, go, is that really the smartest thing for us to be doing if they can take our data, share our data, attack our employees, attack our customers? Maybe we should rethink this whole we don't pay the ransom stuff. And remember, even people that say they don't pay the ransom, most of them are paying the ransom. So find out if that's, so I'm a big believer in not having one of those, we're not paying the ransom, because most of those people are lying. Or maybe they're not lying, but they're dying if they're not doing it. And I think everybody that hasn't paid the ransom, for the most part, kind of wishes they did. You may have some exceptions here or there where people were just phenomenally lucky and phenomenally prepared. But just, ahead of time, find out whether your company is or isn't going to pay the ransom. Make sure management knows what the risk is now. What is the media response going to be if you get attacked by one of these and they're going to put your data out there publicly on the web and they're going to tell the whole world that you're hacked? What are you going to tell your customers? What are you going to do to reassure your employees and customers when their information is stolen? How are you going to handle as an organization any sensitive emails that get out there that are disparaging your customers and partners getting out? Maybe it's a good time to put in a policy that says don't disparage customers. I mean, that sounds pretty silly, but when I was at Microsoft, that was something we tried to practice because at Microsoft, you're used to getting your emails, sucked up in some legal dispute, or if you're in the government, you know that your emails are public. So, but not everybody knows this, that you shouldn't talk disparaging about customers and other employees, because one day that information can end out in public. When you write down something in email or digital, act as if it could be compromised, because it could be, and so on and so on. A lot of good defenses there. The biggest thing to do is you need to communicate how ransomware is changing and how a backup will not save your company anymore. You can use the slide deck as part of your security awareness training. We got lots of other really good tools I'll talk about in a minute. Also, we certainly believe that having a good security awareness program works, where you are educating your employees. You're doing simulated phishing testing at least once a month. At least once a month, you're giving education and do a simulated phishing test to measure how well they're not being tricked into phishing. You know, make them trying to detect the fish into a game, and they're clicking on the, maybe the fish alert button. We have a fish alert button that you can install on Outlook and Gmail clients, where they can say, oh, this is a fish, and they can report it to a predefined email address, and it will report it and delete it at the same time. But we know for sure that if you begin a consistent program of phishing your end users and giving them education, that you can take down what's called your phish prone rate, the number of people that click on something, take it from an average of 30% down to 2% in a year. And this is data from most of our customers. This isn't some companies. This isn't the best companies. This is the average company. Goes from 30% to 2% in a year of people not clicking, and anything you do helps you out. Feel free to visit KnowBe4.com/resources. We got lots of cool white papers there, white papers like the Ransomware Hostage Rescue Manual, which, by the way, we are just updating really quickly because we have to bring in the impacts of Ransomware 2.0 now. And the CEO Fraud Prevention Manual, that's about the business email compromises, and there's my 12 ways to hack multi-factor authentication, the two-way factor authentication. We got lots of cool tools, including some of my favorite, where you can do phishing security tests against your users to see how many a sample would fall for. You can check for, we have our ransomware simulator out there that will see if your antivirus will detect all 20 of the most popular ransomware programs. The breach password test will look out on the internet and out in the dark net and stuff to see if your company's login names and passwords are out there. Lots of really cool tools. We put up like a new tool every couple of months and new white papers all the time, plus every webinar I've ever done, every webinar Kevin Mitnick has ever done for us, and my coworkers, Eric Cron and James and Javed Malik, they're all out there on there at KnowBe4.com/resources. Please, a lot of good, useful information there. David, I know we've got time to take a few questions. If I don't get to your questions today, feel free to email me at rogerg@KnowBe4.com, rogerg@KnowBe4.com, and I promise I'll answer your question within 24 hours. With that said, Dave, let's get to as many as we can before we have to go.
Sounds great. Excellent content there, Roger. Really scary time for ransomware. You scared me even. So thank you for sharing your email address there. So let's see. First question is, how much of this is just criminal monetary gain, and how much of this is really hurting business and disrupting businesses?
I mean, it's all about financial gain for the most part. I mean, you do have the outliers like the Sony Pictures North Korean attack, right, which was trying to stop the movie from being published. You do have nation states, but most nation states are breaking in, stealing intellectual property and things like that. Although in some cases, ransomware, like, Russia, there's a large percentage of Russia's revenues are financed by ransomware, and it's only allowed by the leadership of Russia. And, there's other places like in Nigeria where the Nigerian scams happen so much that it literally is a part of the economy that drives the economy. But the most part of it is, it's financial gain, and if you pay the ransom, they're going to give you the decryption key, and it will usually, and they usually don't leak your data and do all the terrible things if you pay them.
Okay, good to know. You might have heard this question before. I know you're not a backup expert, but is there a backup that can truly protect you from ransomware?
I don't know, but I would say certainly, I don't know. There is. They can protect you against just the traditional I locked you up stuff. You want to make sure that you have known good, clean backup. If you can access your backup online, request it in any way, well, so can the attacker. But this whole thing has been about what you cannot be saved by a data backup, right? If they steal your data and they threaten to put it out there on the internet, a tape backup is not going to save you. If they've got your employees' passwords and customer passwords and login names, they're not going to save you. Excuse me. So tape backup can save you from traditional ransomware, but not ransomware 2.0.
Great point. I mean, there's a lot more to it than just, can I get my data back? What about, can you talk about the negative effects of paying for ransomware decryption? Does that make you more likely to experience another attack?
I would say, so that's interesting. That is actually probably one of the most common questions I get. And my answer to that is, if you pay, if I pay, am I more likely to be attacked? No, not because of paying the ransom. I've yet to hear of a story of somebody that paid the ransom that then got re-attacked by the same ransomware group. But I do hear people that pay the ransom or don't pay the ransom, they get hit again and again. And it's because they typically have weak controls in the first place, and different ransomware gangs get them again. I've heard of people hit 2 and 3 times by ransomware. I've never heard of someone that paid the ransom that got hit by the same ransomware gang, and I've not heard of ransomware gangs sharing information with each other. So typically it's more of, hey, you're a victim, opportunity victim, where they just, a lot of times it's said it takes companies 2 and 3 times until the pain is so bad where they really start to be super strict on their controls, so they stop the ransomware. But so as best as I know, people that paid the ransom usually didn't get reattacked by the same group or because of the same group. Also, a related question, people will say, well, if I paid the ransom, can I recover? Most of the time, but everyone I heard that's ever paid the ransom, they get the decryption key, but it doesn't always help them, either because the ransomware is buggy or, ransomware doesn't encrypt in an error-free way. They're not spending, they don't have teams of developers trying to do error check code. And so I've heard of people that paid the ransom that still got, that it didn't really help when they got the keys. I've never heard of it hurting a person, but I have heard that there's certain ransomware families where getting the key didn't help that much, but those ransomware gangs tend to go out of business because if they get known as somebody that doesn't help and uncrypt the data, they go out of business, and that does happen, or they make the ransomware better. But paying it, I've never heard of it really hurting anybody other than, you got to pay the money for it.
Right. Okay, great advice. So, I mean, how do you truly know that there isn't anything already like hibernating in your backups? That are there any kind of scans that can help you to assure that your backup data is really safe?
Not completely. There's nothing that's super safe. The best you can do is try to make sure that the encryption keys didn't change. A lot of times the encryption keys, when they do get changed, that's in your event logs. And, make sure that your services aren't being stopped. Start to monitor, and if all of a sudden your database services are being stopped, where it could be like a ransomware copying your databases, start to pay attention to those. Most people don't even look for it. Like, there is an event in most software that says, oh, the encryption key for the tape backup software was, changed. It's in a log somewhere. But if you don't even look for it, you can't alert on it and can't respond to it. So it's more about trying to be alert for what to look for and what can occur. But you can never be 100% sure that you don't have some type of corrupted backup or something like that. But certainly some of the players are much better at it than others. And, what you want to do is ask them, have you had a lot of ransomware recoveries? And if so, how did it go for you? As long as they're honest, you'll find out whether they've had good or bad experiences with ransomware recovery.
Okay, great advice. And then probably the last question we have time for here is, I mean, I know a lot of companies don't want to pay the ransom because they don't want to fund cyber terrorism. So, I mean, what do we need to do as a security community to not be funding cyber terrorism like that?
I've heard that word actually funds terrorists and stuff like that. So does drugs and things like that. I don't know. What I would say this is, even if you or your organization says we're not going to pay the ransom, most of the other people are. It's not even 40%. It's well over 40%. I've talked to some ransomware recovery people that said they've not been involved in a ransomware recovery where the ransom hasn't been paid in over a year. They're all paying it, or almost everybody's paying it. And if that's the case, you not paying is not going to help. And on top of it, it's not just getting your data back. It's protecting your employees, protecting your customers. That may be worth paying the ransom for. And it's a bad thing, but it's just, if you can't stop it, if they're in and you get a ransom 2.0 attack, probably it's a business decision, and the cheapest thing you can do in almost every case is pay the ransom until we finally get systems that are strong enough to stop it. Because if they have copied your data, got your employee and customer login names and passwords and social security numbers, I mean, they really got you over a rail. It's tough to say, hey, I'm not going to pay, because you're going to have a lot of bad ill will going on after that.
Yeah, great advice. And it sounds like we all need to do a much better job of educating our employees on security and, making sure we have solid backups. Roger, I'm afraid that's all we have time for today, but it's been really great having you on. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, David. Thank you, everyone, for showing up. And email me at rogerg@knowbe4.com if you have any more questions.
Thank you. And for more information, visit knowbe4.com. And some of you may be wondering who today's gift card winner is. The Amazon $300 gift card is going out to Miguel Rodriguez of South Carolina. Congratulations, Miguel Rodriguez of South Carolina. We'll reach out to you to deliver your gift card. Thank you, everyone, for joining us on the event today. Hope you learned a lot. It was really fascinating content today. Hope to see you next time. Have a great day and stay safe. Protect yourself from ransomware.